Hi, I'm David Riley, and welcome to People and Politics. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to my channel. I'd be very grateful. Joining me on today's show to discuss his new book is political editor and producer Rob Burley. I'm really looking forward to discussing it. So, welcome to People and Politics. Rob, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's very nice to see you.
And you, thank you very much, David.
I've been really looking forward to talking to you today because I've had a look at your book and the first thing that came to me is you've had a really long career in political broadcasting, and you must have seen a lot of action and a lot of memorable and not so memorable stuff over the years.
Yeah, I mean, the book, in a way, the book is to an extent that somebody like me deserves a memoir, which I'm not sure I quite qualify really for someone who deserves a memoir, but it does have that as a kind of thread through it because it does, these are things largely, although not exclusively in the book, which are things I experienced. So, there is actually a very significant section of the book about something I just watched like a viewer, which was Margaret Thatcher's interview with Brian Walden in 1989. But thereafter, it's really about my own experience, as a first a junior person and eventually running the BBC's live political programs department, doing interviews and discussion programs and all those things. So yeah, it has been a quite long career. Hopefully, there's still some time left on it.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be friends that, but so you read American Studies at Nottingham, and I'm sure when you first left university, you worked for a Paul Flynn MP. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes. So American Studies, yes, which doesn't seem like really the reason for American Studies at the time for a lot of people was it gave you the opportunity to go to America, which I'd never done as my parents didn't take those kind of holidays. So it was extraordinary to do that, see America. And also I've got a big passion for American politics, and hopefully my next book is going to feature a bit of that in it. But yeah, and then when I got home, it took me a long time. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. People feel pressure to decide what they're going to do quite early, and I don't think they need to do that necessarily. I didn't decide what to do. I didn't join television, until which was in the end the right thing for me until I was 27. So, having worked for an MP for a few years, yeah, I worked for Paul Flynn, who was a great man, and I learned a lot there. But one thing I did learn was that politics itself or Parliament wasn't really for me.
No, because I'm sure I read that you almost went into politics, but I think that experience taught you that it wasn't your thing. But I think in 1996, I think it was, you joined ITN as a junior researcher, and you've been in broadcasting since.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, I was never going to go into politics myself, as it were. I mean, I was working for a politician. It wasn't the right thing for me. I was just more interested in. I didn't want to be tribal, and I didn't want to act as if I knew the answers. I think if you're a politician or a political sort of spad or whatever, in a way, you're committed to the particular party you're associated with, and that's it.
Yeah.
I actually joined a station called Granada Talk TV before the current triumphantly magnificent Talk TV that we experience today. There was a channel called Granada Talk TV, and it had on it presenters you may have heard of, who at the time were obscure because this was a channel on number. I don't know how far down the EPG it was, but it was a very high number, and it had people like Graham Norton and Sacha Baron Cohen and Natasha Kaplinsky. All these people started out not one of their earliest gigs was on that channel. So that was weird. but and I similarly for me on the production side, that was my first way in, and then but it wasn't very long before I was lucky enough to get to ITV proper, and a program. I don't know if you remember a program called the Jonathan Dimbleby program.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that was I really, I mean, I think Jonathan is an underrated political interviewer. He was excellent, and I learned a lot from working with Jonathan.
Yeah.
And that was what I did. Yeah, that was what I did. In the first part of my career in proper.
Yeah. So this year published Why Is This Land Bastard Lying to Me? Where did that come from?
What, the title?
Everything, the book, the title.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the title comes the title, and the way the title is one of those things where when you're on the face of it, David, I've got to be honest, it's not the most compelling proposition to a major publisher like HarperCollins. That you've never heard of me. I've been in television behind the scenes. I've got some stories. I've got some views about things. Fancy letting me write a book for you? What do you think? But when you come up with that title, I think that the title is what binds it together, because the title, "Why Is This Lying Bastard Lying to Me," is a quote famously expressed by Jeremy Paxman in 1989, although originally from a guy called, I believe, Louis Héron, who was a foreign correspondent and deputy editor of the Times in the earlier part of the century. And he said, he was talking to sources in America. And he said, in my head, when I talk to these people, I'm always thinking, why is this lying bastard lying to me? In other words, what is their motivation, etc. But if you put it in Paxman's mouth, right, it's a different thing, which is about the nature of the political interview. And he said that in a way, it wasn't a bad thing to have in your mind when you went into those interviews, which is a controversial thing to say, but in a way it's a way of quickly sort of cutting to the chase of what one of the main themes of the book and one of the main questions around political interviews are, which is should that be the attitude of interviewees? Are they lying bastards? How do they lie? Is lying ever acceptable? Is the lying that happens a consequence of them, politicians that is, or is it actually as much to do with the media? So yeah, that was why the title made sense, and I think makes sense of a project which then I was fortunate enough to have published by a major publisher.
Yeah, that's it. And I think you might agree that in the last couple of years, politicians lying has been taken to a whole new level by Boris Johnson, and it just took it to a new level altogether. And so that's so yeah, the title did was strike a chord, and I really like the opening chapter, the opening bit where you told the story of Boris. Breakfast television had been trying to get an interview with him for months and months and months, and it was that ridiculous situation of him going to hide in a fridge to avoid chatting to breakfast TV. And I'm thinking back, and I wonder if you'd agree that back in the 80s or 90s, people like Margaret Thatcher or they grasped the chance to talk directly into people's living rooms in the morning. But here we had this ridiculous thing where they would go to any length to avoid scrutiny. And I wonder if you thought that had changed a lot over the years.
Absolutely. I'm now looking for a copy of my book because I want to read you. So here it is. I want to read you something, David, which I think encapsulates the journey we've gone on that you just described there. Okay, so indulge me a second. Okay, this is the front.
I'll go here for you.
It's the front. Yeah, it's the frontispiece of the book. So it's the first thing. There's two quotes. Let me read them to your listeners. Okay, the first comes from Brian Walden, the eminent interviewer on ITV who famously interviewed Mrs. Thatcher to great effect, etc. And he had a very clear view about the value of coming on television and what we could do with it in a democracy. He said, The plain fact is that Westminster's time-honoured procedures for calling our leaders to account are in some respects vastly inferior to those of television. When it comes to uncovering truth, there is no substitute for sustained questioning in public by a single individual armed with a clear purpose. We should be proud that we in Britain have made the political interview a more effective instrument of liberty than any of the other people of the democratic world. That's Brian Walden in 1990. Let's go to 2021. Dominic Cummings, at this time the former chief advisor to Boris Johnson, talking about the decision not to put Boris Johnson onto an interview with Andrew Neil during the 2019 election. Why the fuck would we put a gaff machine, clueless about policy and government, up to be grilled for ages? This is not a hard decision.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where we are, David.
Yeah, at the start contract, and yeah, and I don't know how we ever get back to but what's caused that massive shift in political dialogue that politicians avoid scrutiny like that?
That's a big question. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not solely about Boris Johnson. It's about, I think there has been let's look at it from the other end and look at the responsibility of the media as well. So, and the broadcasters. I mean, first of all, the broadcasters have apart from in situations like general election campaigns, essentially given up on offering the electorate the opportunity to have long form interviews with politicians. They don't exist anymore. They used to exist. The last time they existed was a program I made with Andrew Neil, which was after I recount in the book. If you remember, there's an interview that Boris Johnson did with Andrew Neil during the Tory party leadership contest in 2019, when he made he got himself in trouble around the GATT agreement. I won't go through all of it now, but we walked him down a particular road into a bear trap, which he fell into satisfyingly from our point of view, and after that, we went to the then Director General of the BBC, Tony Hall, sort of realised that there wasn't really anywhere for that to happen, and so he asked for a show, and so we set this show up, and it did very, very well. It reached a decent audience. It had significant interviews. It was a return to that long form interview. And as soon as COVID came along and they had a pretext, the powers that be at the BBC decided to cut that show and close it down. So in other words, there's not really anywhere to do this anymore. Most of the time it happens in 6 or 7 minute encounters, during which, you know, the media, the interviewer often is trying to make impact just by being kind of controversial or transgressive in some way, in a way that's going to kind of make it memorable and clippable on social media or something. So, you know, you can't just look at the politicians for that. I do think, though, that Johnson, Johnson didn't always used to be like this. I mean, you may remember a famous interview he did with Eddie Mair when Eddie Mair was standing in for Andrew Marr back in 2013 or something. And he was thoroughly sort of, you know, done over by Eddie, to be honest. And later that day, he was asked about it, and he said, "Look, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. It's exactly what I expect them to do, and that's sort of their job." And so, you know, I wasn't prepared. He actually said I wasn't really prepared. I wasn't expecting a difficult interview at that time of the morning, and I kind of wasn't on my game. And so, fair enough to Eddie. Well done. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. But now, or at that time when he was in office, I mean, we've seen the power of the advisor. I mean, writ large, right? So, way beyond what we saw. I mean, the instincts of Alistair Campbell and Tony Blair were basically to go out and speak to the media a lot. I mean, if you remember, after the Iraq War, Tony Blair got elected. After what was already obviously a disastrous, enterprise, and that seemed to discredit him because of the things he said before it started. So, but he still went out there and he argued the case, and that was and we all think that the New Labour were the sort of great spin doctors who try to control things. But in reality, they saw it as a legitimate and important thing to do, just like Mrs. Thatcher did. But Boris Johnson, you know, sorry to interrupt, sorry, David, but so Boris Johnson, though, you know, his people see the risks as proved by that previous appearance as being too significant. They don't have any interest in democratic norms, you know, in the things that make our democracy work. That they're only interested in being elected. And you might say, well, Rob, you know, have you only just woken up to this fact? But I think it's true that people in the past who didn't want to do difficult things did them anyway because they felt they had to. Like David Cameron, I don't think David Cameron wanted to do interviews with Jeremy Paxman, which was when he was doing the equivalent thing, but he did it. So yeah, something's changed. Some individuals are responsible, and we've seen Liz Truss as another example. And this is extraordinary, right? Liz Truss was making a very big argument about the future of the UK. As it turns out, it was a future that lasted about 5 weeks, but we didn't know that then. And she did not want to come out and make the case in the way that her sort of heroine, Mrs. Thatcher, did, to say, look, you might not like this, it's going to be tough, but we have to do this for the sake of the country. Instead, she essentially hid from any scrutiny of that kind. And that should tell you something. So anyway, I'm rambling on, but that's the situation, and that's how we've got here, I guess.
No, it's interesting because we talk a lot about Boris in that context of avoiding scrutiny, but it mustn't be an illusion. Liz Truss has carried it on, and I think to a greater extent, Richie Sunak is doing the same, because I am very conscious. I think weeks can go by, and I think, where's Richie Sunak? You never hear of him, you never see him until the only time you see him is if he's flying around the world doing photo shoots with heads of state, and but my case doing a crop, but he probably knows that his tenure is likely to be short, so he'll be getting the photographs in while we can, but
maybe. Can I just say that I think that's a little bit unfair. Okay. I do. I hate to speak up for them. But...
it's a sign that I think weeks and weeks go by and I think, where actually say you never hear or see of him.
Well, you know what? I think that in a way he might be better to pursue that particular approach, how you characterize it, than he actually has done. Because I think he does do things. He does do interviews, reasonably regularly. Not long form interviews, but then there aren't any. But there aren't really the opportunity. Often the invite is there for that, but there's no slots that's set aside for that. But his problem's a different one, which is that he is he does. I mentioned I'm writing a chapter for the paperback of this book, which is coming out in February. And I talk about how I was at a dinner when I ended up, and it shows how C-list he was, that he was sat next to me at a dinner at the Spectator. Is
that unfair as well, or yourself?
No, I think it's entirely right. And anyway, I sat with him, and he was fine, and he was a normal person, well, highly intelligent, clearly.
Right.
It wasn't very long ago, really, before because his rise has been fairly meteoric, but. He was able to speak in a normal way, but then he's in front of a camera and he just speaks in this bizarre manner, which is essentially trying to sort of, deflect things he doesn't want to talk about and just repeat lines that he's got into the room with. And it's not that he doesn't do interviews. He's just, to be blunt, he's just not very good at them. He makes it worse.
Yeah. No, it's not got that. It's not got great skill in that area. I was interested to read in the book because you talk a lot about the type of the long form interview and short form, and of course the person doing most of the long form right now is Beth Rugby. She's doing terrific work, and is she still doing long form interview?
Yeah. Yes. So. Yeah, and I'm working with her when they happen. So yeah, we do. So I think it's a bit. We had a program called the Beth Rigby Interviews, which was a kind of in a particular slot, and now it's a bit more loose than that because we're running up to an election, but very much the intention of continuing to do that. So she can be effective in a short form interview, but also in a long form interview. And I have to say, having worked with a lot of the biggest names, I think she is an exceptional talent at this. I don't know if you happen to see, she did an interview with the then chief executive of Stonewall. Ian Anderson in the summer, and it was, a lot of people are quite wary of that issue. You have to be quite careful about the trans issue, that is. So we had a conversation about the trans issue, but she wanted to do it, and she grasped the complexities of the arguments, and I think I don't think it went that well for him, but it certainly was it was a mistress class, I suppose, in how to perform one of those interviews.
Yeah, I think she's very skilled at what it doesn't, I really enjoy listening to her. I particularly like, and I really like her famous interview with Boris, about the Partygate and about the party in the garden, and just saying, do you know how silly this works?
I think that's a really important point. Sorry, do you want to finish? Sorry, do you want to finish that point?
No, that wasn't finished. Go on.
Yeah, so the thing that's really good about that, I think it's really, I don't know why we allow, or why everyone expects that the conversations we have with politicians are unlike any other conversations we ever have in life with anybody else. If you spoke to your friend or your partner or a family member in the way that they do, and then you ask them a question, and what would you like, a cup of tea or coffee, and they said, well, the important thing here is that we have a beverage of some kind, rather than being clear about the answer. I'm taking the mickey slightly, but it's true. And so what was good? Sorry.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. But and so that case that you mentioned there, the one about the parties, is it the way she's really good at that thing of like, what? It's like you went in and you didn't know it was a party. I mean, like you say, if you were speaking to your mate, you say, what? So you showed up there and you didn't notice a party was going on. It would just be ludicrous. And so I think calling that out in the context of a political interview is really good. I think we should try and I think we should just try and not accept the rules of this game anymore. It's not serving anybody's interest, including the politicians. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that the way that we absorb the news over the last 20 years, that the proliferation of 24-hour media, do you think that's been part of the cause of the change in interview format? Is that why we're all short form? Because of the way that we absorb news?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think because of the way we absorb news, a BBC executive or the director general or whatever it is has to sort of suddenly finds himself inexorably having to, get rid of a show that delivered long form interviews. It's a choice that they make. The reason they did that is not because of the way we consume news, it's because they were more concerned about ratings at 7 o'clock in the evening because of, how they were going to go up against ITV or something, which is weird because, the BBC, as we know, is in a sort of existential position really about this, and having someone like Andrew Neil, with his background and perspective, operating a program like that was sort of good for the message, which was that we are impartial and that we're fair. And so it's incredibly short-sighted. So I don't think, but look, I mean, so in that sense, I don't think it's about what you say. I mean, obviously, the fact that there's so much media, there's so much to fill.
Yeah.
In a way, they're tempted to just do a single interview with one person for a pool interview and just repeat like a parrot the same lines and then not get into any trouble. They're risk averse, But I think the real reason they're risk averse, for example, Liz Truss again. I mean, I would say the reason she's risk averse is because deep down inside, she must know that she's not adequate at this. That she actually she's going to come a cropper if she puts herself into that position too much. So she's not going to take the risk. I mean, Johnson was more of a blunderbuss who'd go in and do anything, but his men, Cummings and Kane, would hold him back because they were fearful that someone who they basically regarded as an idiot, but were putting forward as the prime minister, that he would mess up. So I mean, there's lots and lots of reasons. I mean, the other thing I'd say about the proliferation of media and the way it's changed is social media. There's an argument that says, well, because of social media, it's short clips. There's no space for the long form interview. It's all quick and TikTokery. But in reality, I think that the long form interview is more likely to produce a good material, even just for clipping. Even if you're just looking for good material to clip, you get better stuff if you actually let it breathe, rather than if you just get them to say the same thing over and over again. So,
yeah, and going forward, do you think political broadcasting will continue? Obviously, it'll continue to evolve, but do you think it'll change at all going forward?
look, the thing is, I've said this to a few people. All I can do, right, is do something like write a book and go on a podcast like yours and talk about it. Yeah. But ultimately, it's hard not to be pessimistic, right? It's hard. And so, the only way it's going to change is if, in some way I can't quite describe, we collectively, decide that we'll kind of demand this. I don't know how that can manifest itself. Maybe it won't, but that's the only way it's communicated, that the public understand. That's what I'm trying to do, is make them realize it's not some incidental thing. It's a TV show. It was central to the discourse that we saw in the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s. And it was really important for that reason, because if we don't have that, we lose a lot, a great deal. So we need to all rediscover it. And I hope that those people buying the book will rediscover the importance of it. But also, I just hope we see a generation of politicians come through at some point who realize that somebody who realizes that if they're authentic and actually decide not to be sort of media trained to death, and actually communicate with people, that authenticity can be incredibly powerful. And the only people at the moment who seem to harness authenticity are the populist giants of, Trump, Johnson, and whoever that guy is in Argentina is. Those people are they're authentic communicators about who they are, or a version of themselves that appears to be authentic, and they serve a particular sort of space. Whereas, what if a mainstream politician was able to just dare to communicate more freely, and then and agree to doing longer form interviews, and maybe that would lead to something different. But I can't be optimistic about it. But all I can do is just make the case, really.
Well, like you say, I hope we'll get more content like that, and people like Beth Rugby will keep doing what they do. And I have emailed Beth Rugby and asked her to come on my show, because I would love to hear about her career, and I'm very interested. So hopefully she'll come on sometime. And but you've been at the BBC, you've been at ITV, you've been at Sky. Do you think your future will stay at Sky?
Say that again. Sorry, stay at Sky. What about Sky?
And then do you think you'll stay at Sky for the time being?
I mean, I was lucky, because for 13 years I was at the BBC, and one of the things about leaving the BBC is you leave a lot of that kind of security behind, because you just don't know what happens. So at the moment, I'm just doing that. I'm doing that for the foreseeable future. I think it's a great channel. I think that Beth is fantastic. I think Sophie Ridge is superb. There's some real talent there. And I'm very happy to be doing that. And look, you can imagine, with whatever, despite all my frustrations with the process and with the nature of the media that they do, it's exciting to come into a general election year effectively next year, and to see how that plays out, and to play one's part in kind of finding the questions that will be revealing and difficult and all those things. So, I'm excited about it. I mean, I'm not that woman Brenda who said not another one when they had that, when they called that election. I'm sort of the other one, the opposite, really, of like, yes, let's have another one. We haven't had one for a long time now, so it's going to be really, I don't know what you think, but I'm looking forward to it. Are you excited? Where do you stand on that?
Absolutely, I really look forward to it. I hope it comes in the spring, and it doesn't have, or in May. It doesn't make us wait till the autumn. But I really look forward to it. It's been interesting to see what happens, and I think it's going to be great. I think people are talking like I think people are talking like Keir Starmer has won, but I think he's got a lot of work to do before he gets to where Tony Blair was.
Yeah, and I don't think he is, in a way, he's not competing on the same pitch as he is Tony Blair, in terms of he's not riding a wave of enthusiastic excitement and sort of naive idealism, is he? He's more of a kind of, I can steady the ship. I'm a solid figure. That's kind of what he's gone for. And if that's enough to get him in, and we don't know, then I guess you'll think that's vindicated. But that is certainly the approach. Yeah.
Time will tell, but it'll be really exciting. And today, I really love talking about politics, which is why I started this podcast. I just thought I want to talk about politics, and that's why I did it. And I suppose I was going to ask you, over your years in television, have you come across many people like myself with an obvious disability, or in particular a verbal communication, working in broadcasting or media?
Good question. I mean, look, I remember working actually at ITV, and there was a guy who had a verbal disability. And look, there were significant practical problems, which at that time I don't think they were really very good at ameliorating. He was doing, from my memory, he was doing work experience there. Things weren't set up to make that possible. It was difficult for him. And actually, I just read. Did you read that book by Lucy Webster? Have you come across that book?
No, I don't think so.
So she's a journalist, a disabled broadcaster, and not a broadcaster, but so much as a producer, and she writes very well. And it really did open my eyes actually quite a lot to. The truth is, I think a lot of people don't pay much attention to it. That's the truth, and they just put people in boxes, and they just don't really pay much attention. I probably didn't do enough at the BBC. I tried to do more. I tried to do things about diversity where I was working. But I also think, actually, for disabled people come further down the queue than sort of other people in those categories of diversity. That's the truth. So reading her books had really opened my eyes to it and made me think, that it's not something I properly thought about, really. So have you? How do you approach this thing? Because you're doing a podcast. I can understand what you're saying. I think listeners will be able to understand what you're saying. But how do you approach that? Was there some foreboding because of your disability?
I have been doing a lot of filming and editing, and I did a short course in filming and editing with the Media Trust, and excuse me. Excuse me. And at the end of the Media Trust course, I applied for a lot of jobs and I didn't get any. And then so I'm very unemployed, and I thought if I start a podcast, might get my name out there, I might, people can see what I can do rather than think about what I can't. So I don't know what the future holds, but I've been phenomenally frustrated, because as you said a while ago, I think when they talk about diversity, it's good, but unfortunately, I think within diversity, there's a lot of categories, and I think disability falls to the bottom of the pile. But
I think that's true.
But that's.
I actually.
Yes.
Sorry, David. Did you read? I don't know if you got to the end of the book or not. Because there's an afterword there.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. I think last year you were diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and how is that manifesting and affecting you?
Well, obviously it was a shocking thing, but it's and this happened in 2021, which wasn't a great year for me because that was the year I left the BBC, essentially because of cuts, and I chose that I wasn't going to stay. So I had that. It was quite a hard challenge, and then we just had COVID before that, and then this happened. The reason I mention it is just that it's a funny thing for me because I don't really have any significant impairment because of it, but I probably will. I almost certainly will. And I will at some point get to understand what it's like to be perceived in that way, because if it's manifesting itself, I will find it's a strange thing to think of, but I will understand in a less profound way, because it won't be for life, but it will be a different way of being greeted in the world, right? The way that you're seen by others and what they see and what they don't see. So it's something that I mean, I'm not looking forward to it, but it will be an interesting thing if that's indeed how it plays out. I mean, it's a funny thing. Parkinson's is so varied. I mean, there's so many people with different manifestations of it that you wouldn't know that I've got it, but I've only had it for a couple of years. So anyway, it may lead to me having a more profound understanding of what you're saying, although not in the same depth, obviously.
Yeah, sure. You might do, as you say, nobody knows, but I've always thought there's something quite different. About, for example, somebody who's a wheelchair user,
Mm-hmm.
if they can still speak perfectly, clearly, and coherently, I think that they can turn up in the world and be accepted as as a non-person that just can't walk. But something like myself, who moves differently, articulates differently, I think it's a different experience altogether. And it's difficult because disabled or disability comes under one umbrella.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mentioned that guy that was at the place when I was at ITV a long time ago, and the issue arose at that point that he, one of the main parts of the role that he was doing work experience on was actually phoning people. So, so it's not a thing that you could. It's not actually that isn't something you could just discount as necessarily as not being relevant, can you? Because he probably wouldn't have been explicable to people on the phone who weren't preparing themselves or understanding the situation. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's quite ironic. Now, I haven't worked for a long time, but my last job, believe it or not, was on a telephone helpline.
Oh, really?
We think it's been the most unlikely job for something like that. But myself, I did that for 2 years, and I was fine. Occasionally, a caller would say, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" But 9 times out of 10, it just wasn't an issue. And so, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been great. So
I really enjoyed it, David. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and good luck with the podcast.
Thanks, yeah, and for fun, and thanks.